Your son is still alive." The words landed soft as falling ash, but Marcus Hale felt them close around his throat like a hand. He turned so fast that the old photograph slipped from his fingers and drifted down onto the wet grass beside the headstone. For a moment he just stared at the small girl standing behind him, certain he had misheard. "What did you say?" he asked. His voice came out lower than he meant it to. "Your son," the girl repeated, calm as anything. "He's still alive." Marcus pointed at the gray stone in front of him, and his hand was not steady. "Do you see this? Do you see the name carved right there?" He read it the way he had read it 100 times, every word a small wound. "Caleb Hale, that's my boy. He died last spring. I was in Singapore closing a shipping deal when it happened. My brother called and told me Caleb got sick. Fast, the kind of sick that doesn't wait. By the time my plane landed, it was already finished. The funeral had already happened. They told me it was kinder if I didn't see him at the end." He swallowed. The girl did not flinch. "So don't stand in a graveyard," Marcus said, "and tell a father his son is alive." But the girl did not run, and she did not look away. She stepped closer to the stone, studied it, then looked back up at him with eyes that were far too steady for someone so small. "My granddaddy says a name on a stone don't mean the person's down underneath it," she said quietly. "Sometimes it just means somebody wanted you to stop looking." Marcus felt the cold of the morning all the way into his chest. He looked at her properly now, maybe 8 years old, in a coat 2 sizes too big, her hair in careful braids tied off with little plastic beads. There was nothing cruel in her face, nothing playing a joke. "Who are you?" he asked. "And why are you talking to me about my son?" "My name's Della," she said. "Della May. My granddaddy keeps up this cemetery, cuts the grass, fixes the fences. I come sit with him after school sometimes." She glanced at the headstone again. "I seen you here before, mister. Lots of times. You always come by yourself. You stand a real long while. Sometimes you talk to it." Marcus's jaw tightened. He had never once imagined anyone watching him do that. The talking had been his secret, the only place left where he was still a father, where he could tell Caleb about his day, ask him if he was proud, apologize for being on the other side of the world when it mattered. Before he could answer, Della crouched and picked the fallen photograph up from the grass. She turned it over in her small hands and looked at it before he could take it back. It was an old picture. Marcus on the beach, with Caleb riding high on his shoulders, both of them squinting into the sun, both of them laughing at something the camera never caught. "That's him," Della said softly. Then, even softer, "That's the boy that lives at our house." Marcus went very still. "Give that to me." She handed it over, but then she reached into her coat pocket and drew out a second photograph, folded once and kept safe inside a little sandwich bag, the way you keep something you are afraid of losing. "My mama told me," Della said, "if I ever saw you again, to give you this." His hand closed around it. He almost didn't want to look. When he did, the world tilted. It was a small, plain living room. A worn brown couch with a blanket folded over the arm. A boy stood barefoot on a thin carpet, thinner than Marcus remembered, his hair grown out longer and shaggy at the ears, holding a bowl of cereal and smiling the careful, shy half-smile of a child who is still learning whether it is safe to be happy. It was Caleb. The photograph began to shake, and it took Marcus a second to understand it was shaking because his hands were. "That's our front room," Della said. "He's been with us almost a year. My mama found him behind the old laundromat last winter. He was real sick, real scared. He kept telling everybody his name was Caleb and his daddy was a man named Marcus Hale." "That's not possible." Marcus could barely push the words out. "My son is dead. There were doctors, a death certificate. There was a funeral. My granddaddy says that funeral was a lie." Marcus turned at the sound of a deeper voice and saw an old black man walking slowly up the path between the graves, a work cap held in both hands against his chest. His face was lined and gentle, the kind of face that had spent a lifetime being patient. "Granddaddy," Della said. "I told him." The old man stopped beside the stone and looked at Marcus for a long, measuring moment. "Mr. Hale," he said, "my name's Moses Freeman. I've tended this ground 31 years. Marcus said nothing. He was still holding both pictures, one of the boy on his shoulders, one of the boy on a stranger's carpet, and he could not stop comparing the two faces, because they were the same face. "I'm going to tell you something," Moses said, "and I need you to hear all of it before you decide I'm a crazy old man." He drew a breath. "Your son is not buried here." Marcus looked up slowly. "What did you just say to me?" Moses tapped the grass at the foot of the stone with the toe of his boot. "This grave is empty." "No." Marcus shook his head hard. "No. My brother handled it. He told me the hospital took care of the body. He told me the casket was closed and sealed because of how sick Caleb was at the end. He told me everything was done. Your brother's the one who came here that day," Moses said evenly. "Him and a man in a suit I never got a name for. Said it was a private burial, closed casket, paid me in cash and told me not to open it." The old man's eyes did not waver. "I've lowered a lot of people into this ground, Mr. Hale. Children too, God forgive this world. And I know what a casket with a child in it is supposed to weigh." He paused. "That one didn't weigh anything close." The cemetery went silent. Even the wind seemed to stop. "I never said a word," Moses went on. "A poor man learns early that rich folks don't like questions, and a job is a hard thing to find at my age. But I never forgot that day either. And then a sick little boy turns up at my daughter's door saying his name's Caleb and his daddy's named Hale, and I think to myself, Moses, the Lord don't deal in accidents." Della stepped forward. "He's got a little mark behind his ear," she said, reaching up to touch the spot behind her own. "Right here, shaped like a little moon. He let me see it once when I was braiding pretend with his hair." Marcus closed his eyes. The crescent. A pale birthmark behind Caleb's left ear, shaped like a sliver of moon, hidden under his hair so you only found it if you went looking. Marcus used to kiss it good night when the boy was small. Eleanor, his late wife, used to call it Caleb's little secret. Hardly anyone in the world knew that Mark was there. When Marcus opened his eyes again, he looked at the stone, then at the photographs in his fist, then at the girl and her grandfather. For 1 full year he had come to this place to talk to his dead son. And now he understood. He had not been mourning at a grave. He had been talking to a lie someone had buried for him. He folded the second photograph carefully and held it tight. When he spoke, his voice had changed, still quiet, but with something underneath it now, something that had been gone a long time. "If my son is alive," he said, "you take me to him, right now." Della looked up at him and nodded once. "Yes, sir," she said. "I will." They walked toward the rusted iron gate at the edge of the cemetery, the three of them, and just before they reached it, Marcus stopped. "Della," he said, "before we go a step further, I need you to tell me everything, from the start. Don't leave anything out, even if you think it doesn't matter." The girl nodded and took a breath, the way a child does when she has decided to be brave. "Granddaddy used to work some nights out here," she began, "fixing fences, cutting grass when it got too tall. One night last winter, my mama drove down to pick him up after her shift at the laundromat closed. I was in the back seat. It was cold, the kind of cold that makes the windows go white inside." Marcus listened with his hands buried in his coat pockets, trying to hold his mind steady, even though his heart was running ahead of him. Mama stopped at the corner store first. When she came out, she heard something behind the building. Coughing. Not regular coughing, the kind that sounds like it hurts. Della glanced up at him. She went around the side, and there he was, behind the trash bins, all curled up. He thought she worked at that store. He thought she was going to call somebody and send him back. He tried to get up and run, but he couldn't hardly stand. Marcus stopped walking. "Send him back where?" "To the place with the white halls and the locked doors," Della said. "That's how he says it. He told my mama some people put him there. He said they told him his daddy got too busy for him. She said it plainly, the way children deliver the worst things in the world. He said they told him his daddy didn't want a sick boy slowing him down. Marcus had to look away, out at the gray street beyond the gate, and breathe. "What did your mama do?" he asked. "She picked him up and carried him to the car," Della said simply. "We don't got much, but my mama always says you don't leave a child out in the cold, not for anybody. He was burning up that whole first week, coughing all night. Granddaddy spent money we didn't have on medicine. Mama made him soup and put him in my bed, and I slept on the couch, and I didn't even mind." They started walking again, turning down a street where the houses grew smaller and leaned closer together, and the paint peeled off the porches. "When he got better, he started telling us things," Della said. "His name, your name. He said you took him to the ocean once and bought him a red boat that he floated in the bathtub. Mama thought maybe he was making stories up 'cause he was scared, but one night he started crying and saying he wanted to go home, and he kept saying your name over and over till he fell asleep saying it." Marcus's throat ached. "Did he ever say anything about my brother? My brother's name is Gerald, or his wife, Camille." Della thought hard. "He said a man and a lady came and got him from the hospital. Said the lady smelled like flowers and the man had a gold watch. He said they told him they were taking him somewhere to get better, but the car drove a long, long way, and the place they took him wasn't a hospital. It had a fence." She paused. "He said the lady promised his daddy would come visit on Sunday, but Sunday never came. No Sunday ever came." Marcus stopped at the edge of the street and stood there with his eyes shut, and for a moment he was not a man worth more money than he could count. He was just a father who had been on the wrong side of the planet while someone with his own blood loaded his sick child into a car and drove him away from everything he loved. "How much further?" he asked. "Right there," Della said and pointed. It was a small house at the end of the row, white paint gone to gray, a porch light burning even in the daytime, a child's chalk drawing fading on the front walk. A woman stood in the open doorway with a dish towel in her hands, watching them come, and behind her legs, half hidden, peeked the small pale face of a boy. Marcus stopped dead on the sidewalk. The boy stepped out from behind the woman. He was thinner than Marcus's memory of him, taller too, the way children grow when you aren't there to see it. His hair hung too long over his ears. But the face was Caleb's, and the eyes found Marcus's across the little yard and went wide. "Daddy?" the boy whispered. And then he was running, bare feet slapping the cold walk, and Marcus dropped to his knees right there on the concrete and caught his son the way a drowning man catches a rope, and neither of them said anything for a long time because neither of them could. "You came," Caleb said into his shoulder again and again. You came. I told them you'd come." "I'm here," Marcus said, and his voice broke clean in half. "I'm here. I'm never going anywhere again. I promise you. I promise you, Caleb." Behind them, Della sat down on the porch step and wiped her eyes with the back of her sleeve, and Moses put his cap back on, and the woman in the doorway pressed the dish towel to her mouth and let herself cry. Her name was Naomi Freeman, Moses's daughter, Della's mother. She made coffee in a kitchen barely big enough to turn around in, and she sat Marcus down at a small table with a chipped surface and told him the rest of it. The doctor visits she'd paid for in cash because Caleb had no papers, no name anyone would believe, no way to prove he was who he said he was. "I wanted to go to the police," Naomi said, holding her mug with both hands. "But what was I gonna tell them? That a little white boy showed up at my door saying he's the dead son of a billionaire I never met? They'd have taken him from me in an hour and called me a liar, or worse. People like me don't get the benefit of the doubt, Mr. Hale. We get the suspicion." "I understand," Marcus said quietly. And he did. He understood that this poor family had risked everything they had, and they did not have much, to keep his son safe and fed while his own brother had tried to erase him from the earth. He looked across the room. Caleb sat on the floor with Della, the two of them stacking a tower out of mismatched wooden blocks, the boy laughing at something the girl had said, and the sound of that laugh undid something in Marcus's chest that had been tied shut for a year. "Whatever you've spent," Marcus said, turning back to Naomi, "I'm going to make it right. The medicine, the food, all of it, and more than that. But first," his voice hardened, "first I'm going to find out exactly what my brother did, and I'm going to make sure he answers for every minute of it." That night, Marcus did not take Caleb back to the great empty mansion on the hill. He sat on Naomi Freeman's worn brown couch, with his son asleep against his side and a borrowed blanket over them both, and he did not sleep at all. He made calls. He woke up lawyers. He woke up a private investigator named Hollis, whom he had used for business matters and now turned loose on his own family. By morning, the first cracks were already showing. It came apart faster than Marcus expected, because lies built by arrogant people are built carelessly. They never think anyone will look. Hollis found the death certificate first. It had been signed by a Dr. Pruitt at a private clinic, a man who had surrendered his medical license 8 months earlier for falsifying records in a separate matter. The cause of death listed was a sudden viral illness. There was no autopsy. There was no hospital admission that matched the dates. The clinic where the certificate originated had no record of treating any child named Caleb Hale at all. The funeral home that supposedly handled the burial had been paid $11,000 in cash. The director, when Hollis sat across from him, sweated through his shirt and finally admitted he had been told it was a closed-casket family matter and instructed never to open the box. And the children's home, a place called Marsh Hollow, 2 states away, the kind of underfunded private facility that asked few questions when the paperwork came with money attached, had a record of a boy admitted last spring under the name Calvin Hill, admitted by a married couple, guardianship transferred under emergency provisions. The intake photograph, when Hollis pulled it, was unmistakably Caleb. Marcus stared at that photograph for a long time. The boy in it was crying. The money trail was the last piece, and it was the ugliest. Hollis traced a series of transfers, small enough each to slip notice, large enough together to matter, moving out of a discretionary account that Gerald controlled, and into the pockets of the disgraced doctor, the funeral director, and an administrator at Marsh Hollow. The dates lined up like dominoes. But it was the why that made Marcus set the papers down and walk out onto Naomi's porch to breathe the cold air, because the why was the part that cut. The Hale fortune did not belong to Marcus outright. It was held in a family trust their father had built, a trust with one ironclad rule. The whole of it passed to the direct bloodline, to Marcus, and after Marcus, to Marcus's children. Gerald, the younger brother, the one who had spent his whole life resenting the order of his birth, was named only as a contingent beneficiary. He inherited nothing of substance, unless Marcus died without a living heir. Caleb was the heir. Caleb was the lock on the door. And with Marcus constantly traveling, constantly overseas, a man who flew over oceans the way other men crossed the street, all Gerald had to do was remove the child, fake the proof, and wait. One untimely accident for Marcus somewhere far from home, and the entire empire would slide quietly into Gerald's hands. "He didn't just try to take my company," Marcus said to Hollis on the phone, standing in the cold. "He tried to delete my son so he could take me next." "Looks that way," Hollis said. Marcus looked back through the window at Caleb, eating eggs at the little kitchen table with Della, kicking his feet because he couldn't reach the floor. "Build the file," Marcus said. "Every name, every dollar. I want it airtight before anyone hears a word. And Hollis," he paused, "I want to be the one to tell my brother it's over." He did it at the lake house. The Hales had a place on the water an hour outside the city, all glass and timber, where the family gathered for holidays and pretended to like one another. Marcus called and said only that he wanted to talk, that there was news about the estate, and Gerald, greedy, comfortable, certain, came and brought Camille with him in a coat that probably cost more than the Freeman's rent for a year. Marcus was waiting on the deck when they arrived. He did not offer them drinks. "You look terrible, brother," Gerald said, settling into a chair, smiling that smile Marcus had been watching his whole life. "Still not sleeping? You can't grieve forever, you know. Caleb wouldn't want you wasting away." "Don't say his name," Marcus said quietly. Something flickered behind Gerald's smile. "Marcus, I went to the cemetery yesterday," Marcus said, "the way I do, and a little girl told me my son was still alive." The deck went very still. Camille's wineglass stopped halfway to her mouth. "Marcus," Gerald said carefully, "grief makes people—" "Marsh Hollow," Marcus said. "Calvin Hill, Dr. Pruitt, $11,000 in cash to a funeral home for an empty box." He laid a folder on the glass table between them, and the soft sound of it landing was louder than any shout. An old man who tends a cemetery noticed the casket weighed nothing. He noticed, Gerald, and you didn't even think a man like that was worth being careful around. That was your mistake. You thought poor people don't see. They see everything. They've had to learn to. Camille set her glass down very slowly. Her hand was shaking. "Gerald," she whispered, you swore the boy was—" "Shut up," Gerald hissed, and that one slip told Marcus everything. That she had known, that she had been in the car, that she was the lady who smelled like flowers and promised a Sunday that never came. Gerald stood. He was still trying to find the angle, still trying to be the smartest man in the room, the way he had been trying his whole life. "You can't prove a thing. A child's confused story and an old groundskeeper's feelings—" "I'm not the one who has to prove it," Marcus said. And he stood too, and for the first time in a year he felt the full weight of himself again. "That's what the courts are for. The file is all ready with my attorneys. It's all ready with the district attorney. I came here to look you in the eye first, because Father always said you settle blood matters face to face." He picked the photograph of Caleb up off the table, the one from the children's home, the one where the boy was crying. He held it up. "This is what you did. You took a sick little boy who was asking for his daddy, and you drove him away, and you let him believe I didn't want him. For a year my son thought I abandoned him. You did that. Not for hate. For money." Gerald said nothing. There was nothing left to say. "Get off my property," Marcus said. "The next time we speak, it'll be in a courtroom." The story did not stay quiet for long. A billionaire's son declared dead, found alive in the home of a poor family, discovered by a little girl who tended graves with her grandfather. It had everything, and the world devoured it. Reporters camped at the foot of the mansion's drive. They camped, to Marcus's fury, at the end of the Freeman Street, too, until he hired a security detail whose only job was to keep cameras off Naomi's porch and let Della walk to school in peace. He bought the family a better house quietly in a quiet part of town, and when Naomi tried to refuse it, he said only, "You gave my son a bed. Let me give your daughter a yard." And she stopped arguing. Caleb came home to the mansion, but he asked, the first night, if Della could come too, and so Della came, and the two of them ran shrieking through rooms that had not heard a child's voice in a year, and Marcus stood in the doorway of the great quiet house and listened to it fill up with noise again, and he thought his heart might not be able to hold it. The arrests came in the second week. Gerald and Camille, the disgraced doctor, the funeral director, the administrator from Marsh Hollow. The charges, when they were read out, took a long time to read. Falsifying a death certificate, fraud, conspiracy, illegal transfer of guardianship, child endangerment, child abandonment. On the day the indictments were announced, a reporter caught Marcus on the courthouse steps. "Mr. Hale, is it true your own brother is behind this? Mr. Hale, what about the family trust? Does this change the inheritance? Mr. Hale, a statement." Marcus stopped. He could have walked on. Instead, he turned and waited until the shouting died down, and then he spoke clearly so there could be no mistake. "My son was declared dead while he was still alive," he said. "For 1 year, he believed his father didn't want him. And for 1 year, I believed I had buried my child. What happened to us wasn't a business dispute. It wasn't a misunderstanding about money. It was a betrayal of a child by the people who were supposed to protect him." He looked straight into the cameras. "I'm not standing here as a businessman today. I'm standing here as a father. And I will spend every dollar I have making sure the truth is told and the people who did this answer for it. Everything else comes second." He started down the steps, then turned back and added one more thing. "Some people tried to bury my son with paperwork and a coffin full of nothing," he said. "They forgot the most important part. He was still alive." That night, when Marcus got home, Caleb and Della were on the floor of the big living room, building a tower out of wooden blocks. The base, he noticed, was wider this time. The tower did not fall. The trial began in early spring, almost exactly a year, Marcus realized, from the day they had told him his son was dead. He did not try to keep it quiet anymore. He had learned something he wished he had learned sooner. Silence had protected the guilty. It had let his brother work in the dark for a year. The truth, spoken loud, was the only thing that protected the people who deserved protecting. On the first morning, Marcus held Caleb's hand as they climbed the courthouse steps together. Behind them came Naomi and Moses and Della, dressed in their Sunday best, which was plainer than anything else in that marble building, and Marcus knew without a doubt that they were the most important people there. "You don't have to come inside," Marcus told his son gently. "You can stay out here with Della and Mrs. Freeman." Caleb shook his head. "I want to go in," he said. "I'm not scared anymore. I just want to sit by you." So he sat by his father in the front row, his small legs swinging because they didn't reach the floor. Across the room, Camille sat beside her lawyer with a face gone pale and tired, nothing left of the woman in the expensive coat. Gerald sat next to her in a suit that no longer seemed to fit him right, staring straight ahead like a man still searching for a move that wasn't there. When Camille saw Caleb walk in alive and whole, she began to cry, quietly, and she did not stop. Marcus did not look away from her, but he did not soften either. The trial lasted 3 days. Doctors testified that the death certificate had been forged, that no illness, no admission, no autopsy supported a single word of it. The funeral director testified that he had been paid in cash and told never to open the casket, and that he had wondered but had not asked. An administrator from Marsh Hollow testified that the guardianship paperwork for a boy named Calvin Hill had been pushed through in a single afternoon for a donation to the facility. Bank records, traced line by line, showed money flowing from an account Gerald controlled into every guilty hand. Then Moses Freeman took the stand. He wore a jacket Della whispered he only ever put on for church and for funerals. "Mr. Freeman," the prosecutor asked, "how long have you tended that cemetery?" 31 years, ma'am." "And in 31 years, have you laid a great many people to rest?" "More than I could count," Moses said. "Grown folks, old folks, children too, more than any man ought to have to." "On the day Caleb Hale was supposedly buried, did you notice anything unusual?" Moses looked across the courtroom, his eyes finding the boy in the front row, alive, and then finding Gerald and holding there. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "That casket was too light. I've carried enough of them to know the weight of a child, and that wasn't it. It was the weight of empty." He paused. "I knew something was wrong, but I was told not to open it, and the man who told me had a watch worth more than my house. And a poor man learns that asking the wrong rich man a question can cost him the only job he's got. So I held my tongue." His voice did not waver. I've prayed about that silence every day since. I'm grateful to the good Lord. I get to break it now." The courtroom was perfectly still. Naomi testified next, the cold night behind the laundromat, the boy curled up sick among the trash bins, certain she was there to send him back. The first bowl of soup. The first night he slept without waking up screaming. The way he had insisted, even feverish, that his daddy would come. And then Marcus took the stand. He sat with his hands folded and his voice level, and the prosecutor asked him only one real question. "Mr. Hale, what was the hardest part of this past year?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. "The hardest part," he said, "was standing at a grave for a year, telling my dead son I was sorry I wasn't there at the end, and not knowing that the whole time he was 40 miles away, telling everyone who would listen that his father was going to come and save him." His voice stayed steady, but only just. "I can lose money. I've lost money before and made it back. What I almost lost was a little boy who spent a year of his life believing the one person who was supposed to love him most. He looked then at Gerald. "They didn't just try to steal my company. They tried to erase my son from the world, and they tried to make him die believing he was unwanted. That's the part I will never understand. And that's the part I will never forgive." On the third day, the verdict came back. Guilty. On every count. Camille wept. Gerald only stared straight ahead, the way he had the entire trial, a man who still could not comprehend that the order of things had finally turned against him. Marcus did not feel triumphant. He had expected to. For a year, somewhere deep down, he had imagined this moment as something fierce and hot. Instead, what he felt was quiet. Something that had been clenched in him for 12 months finally let go. He felt, more than anything, finished. A week later, they all stood together in the cemetery, where the whole thing had begun. Marcus stood in front of the gray headstone with his son's name carved into it. For a year, this stone had been the worst thing in his life, the place where his grief lived. Now he understood it had never been a grave at all. It had only ever been the largest lie ever told about his family, set in stone so he would stop looking. Caleb stood beside him, holding the little red boat from the bathtub, the one Marcus had bought him at the ocean a lifetime ago, the one Caleb had remembered through everything. "Can we take it down, Daddy?" the boy asked, looking at the stone. "Yes," Marcus said. "We can." Moses had brought his tools. Slowly, carefully, the way he did everything, the old man worked the headstone loose and lifted it free, and underneath there was nothing but plain dark earth. Empty ground, no casket, no box, nothing at all. Marcus looked down into that empty space for a long moment. "For a whole year," he said quietly, "I thought my son was down there. And he was never there at all. He was out in the world the whole time, waiting for me to come and get him." He looked up at Della, who stood half hiding behind her mother, uncomfortable with the way everyone kept looking at her. "And if it hadn't been for you," he said, "I might have stood at this lie for the rest of my life." Della shrugged, scuffing her shoe in the grass. "I just told the truth," she mumbled. "That's all I did." Moses rested a wide hand on her shoulder. "Sometimes," he said, "telling the truth when everybody else is keeping quiet is the bravest thing a person can do in this whole world." Marcus looked at the empty grave one last time. Then he took his son's hand. "Let's go home," he said. They walked out together through the rusted iron gate, Marcus and Caleb and Della and Naomi and old Moses, the poor family who had taken in a billionaire's son when the world had thrown him away, and the little girl who had told a grieving stranger the truth no one else would. At the gate, Caleb looked up at his father. "Is it over now, Daddy?" he asked. Marcus thought about it. Then he shook his head, and he was almost smiling. "No," he said softly. "It's not over. This is the part where we start living again." This story is a reminder that money and power and success mean almost nothing if you fail the people who love you most. Marcus Hale built an empire that crossed oceans, and he nearly lost his only son because he trusted documents more than his own heart, and trusted his own blood simply because it was his own blood. It reminds us that evil does not always wear a stranger's face. Sometimes it sits across from us at our own family table, smiling, waiting. But it teaches us something kinder, too. Sometimes the people who save us are the ones the world never bothers to notice. A tired woman who wouldn't leave a child in the cold. An old man who remembered the weight of an empty casket. A little girl who walked up to a grieving stranger and refused to let a lie stand. In the end, this is a story about justice. But more than that, it is a story about love, about responsibility, and about second chances, because in the end, a life is not measured by how much you build or how much you keep, but by how many people you refuse to give up on.